I mean, my basic view about Obama is that he's handled the crisis extremely well, the economic crisis. But in a way, it just seems hopeless. I mean, if you look at this AIG scandal, for example,
Right.
you know, why did it occur? I think, I don't understand this fully, but I think what happened is when the Fed decided it needed to rescue AIG in order to prevent a meltdown, you know, they couldn't be bothered with figuring out every last detail about how AIG should be run. After all, it's this enormous, complicated corporation, and they were just trying to prevent, you know, a global financial catastrophe. And I gather that compensation may have come up, and I'm sure the Fed people said quite reasonably, look, you know, we want these people to stay in the corporation and continue to run it, and we can't micromanage compensation, so, you know, just do what you have to do. Nobody could have anticipated, at least not these, you know, these technically sophisticated economist types, the populist outrage that would now occur. And
I'm not so sure about that, but I
really?
think you put it in a very reasonable way. I mean, I think that an economist might not have anticipated it, but anyone with any degree of political brains would have anticipated it. Because there was already a big debate, as you may recall, during the campaign and before about the size of CEO salaries, which, in the views of the public, is easily run together with a question of bonuses for particular folks. And also, since the way in which you phrase the emergency is the financial institutions let us down, they mismanaged, they didn't handle things well, there is a real problem that you create when you start giving super compensation to folks who are said to have failed in their jobs. So as a politician, one could easily have seen it. As an economist trying basically to keep things above water, this is just not the first thing on your menu.
Right, although the politician would have to also give deference to the views of the economist. So when the economist says to the politician, well, if you try to micromanage compensation, and God knows what else this corporation is doing, you're just going to be overwhelmed by detail. You know, AIG is not the only business that the United States is running these days.
Right.
So give up on it, right? Because you might avoid this one source of populist outrage, but you're surely going to run into something else. And in the meantime, these businesses are going to, you know, may not function properly, with the result that this catastrophic economic problem won't be resolved. But I guess my broader point here is just that you know, the president takes enormous risks when he says that there's an emergency, and now the government's going to have to run everything, or the executive branch is going to run everything. So in the very short term, Congress and the people say, fine, you know, we see that there's an emergency. Go ahead, do what you have to do. But in the long term, or in the case of the Obama administration, you know, just a couple months, though, you know, they may very well survive this problem. They find out, you know, they've gotten all of this power, but they get all the responsibility. They get blamed for everything that they can't really control.
Right. I was thinking this reminds me of nothing so much as a Ponzi scheme, and I mean this. I don't mean this to criticize either Bush or Obama, but to talk about the predicament that a president faces in a situation that could be characterized as emergency. So, as you said, and I tend to agree with you, the way in which that the president feels an obligation to characterize the situation as emergency because he doesn't know what the problem is yet, and he wants to have all the resources available at hand in order to deal with it. That's point number one, right?
Right.
But the second point is there are these incentives that I've emphasized to try also to maximize and make the claims urgent and vivid in the public's imagination in order to get Congress, who's usually the stodgy partner in this, to act. Congress has lots of veto points, and so you want to go over Congress's head to the people and say there's a real serious problem, and why won't Congress give me what I want? So that's the second point, right? The third point is that of the Ponzi scheme is, having done that, though, as you say, you create all sorts of political problems down the road, sometimes a year later, sometimes 3 years later, sometimes 7 years later, whatever number of years it is later, because of the fact that people's attention wanders, and you can't and of course, if you don't get immediate results, they get upset. And as a result, this leads to the fourth problem, which is you have an incentive to basically try to find new ways of articulating the nature of the emergency so that you can maintain your political salience and you can maintain your political authority. This is, in fact, what I think George Bush did during the 8 years of his presidency.
Right, and that failed.
And that failed.
Right,
and
that
so,
was the problem.
Yeah, and
that is hard to do.
Yeah, it's very hard to do, and that's why I think it's like a Ponzi scheme. That is, like in a Ponzi scheme, in order to pay off the first people, you have to borrow from the later people, and then to pay them off, you get a number of people. So you have to get a larger and larger number of people basically to get in the scheme. I think that in the politics of emergency, presidents face this same kind of problem. They have to find ways to keep ramping up or characterizing the situation in terms of emergency in order to prevent disappointment. I think that's what happened to Bush.
And this is the key point. But the question is, what's the fact of the matter here? And so there are two possible things that can happen at the second stage, right? There's the Bernie Madoff thing where everything collapses and the president becomes tremendously unpopular and gets kicked out of office.
Right.
And the other possibility is sort of 1984, the Orwell novel, of course, where the government basically has to keep up, have to start inventing emergencies, and because it's more sophisticated than Bernie Madoff or whatever, it can print money. It just keeps it going indefinitely, makes up new wars, or this is the wag the dog story.
Yeah,
also.
Sure. That's very dangerous.
The sort of paranoid view, it might be paranoid, I might be right, as paranoia sometimes is, but the paranoid view as we get 1984, and I read you as sort of inclining toward that view, whereas my more sunny, cheerful view is that this is just the price you pay for being president.
Right.
That, after 4 or 8 years, everybody's going to hate you. They're going to blame you for doing all this stuff, even though basically, you did your best given unbelievably complicated conditions and uncertainty and all the rest. And frankly, we do want the president to do this stuff rather than Congress. Congress is hopeless. The courts are hopeless. They come too late. They can't handle this. So the president does it, and then he gets punished. And, if he's lucky, maybe 20, 30, 40 years, people will appreciate what he did. But otherwise, the best that a president can hope for is just that nothing terrible happens during his administration.
Right.